Welcome to You Can Recover, the podcast where each episode brings you one step closer to making peace with food and body. I'm your host, Andrea Wells, and I know firsthand what it's like to live with and recover from an eating disorder. Now, I'm here to help you along the road to living a new life on your terms, not your eating disorders. So let's dive in and find new ways to thrive as you end the war with food and body, because you can recover. Hey, welcome back to You Can Recover. Today we are talking about one very important thing to avoid doing when you are recovering from an eating disorder. But before we get into that, I want to welcome you to episode 2 of You Can Recover and give a little bit of an update on what to expect with this series in the near future. So I am still deciding on episode frequency. For the first month, I'm definitely going to be doing weekly episodes, so you have that to look forward to. I want to have like a consistent launch. And then I'm going to decide if I will continue at weekly or switch to bi-weekly. Whichever one I choose, I want to commit to it so you know when to expect episodes and when to check for them. I think ideally, I would really love to do weekly, checking in on a weekly basis and providing you recovery content at that level of frequency would be awesome. I'd love to do that. Also, I am a human with many plates to balance, like we all do, and I am in a pretty busy place with therapy right now. I mentioned in the last episode that I also have OCD, and I'm currently doing 2 therapy sessions a week for exposure response prevention therapy, which is like the specialized OCD treatment. So I'm in the midst of that, and there's lots of like homework and practicing in between that takes a bit of time and commitment. I'm also doing some weekly individual therapy and family therapy, and that's on top of the regular job that I work every weekday as well, and normal life stuff that we all have to balance and do, and self-care and all that. So as much as I really badly want to do weekly episodes for the foreseeable future, I think that in order to take care of myself and make sure I can stay consistent for you, I might switch to bi-weekly after the first month here. And that will allow me again to be there when I say I will be and to really have the time and capacity to provide you helpful quality content that is actually going to make a positive difference in your recovery. And like many of us who've experienced an eating disorder, I often find myself pulled into overachieving mode. I want to do it all. I want to do it the best. And I know that also can lead to burnout, and then I can't do anything. So sometimes slow and steady wins the race. And I think in this case here, with You Can Recover, we're going to have a strong start with weekly episodes for the first 4 weeks and then ease into a more steady pace at bi-weekly. And that could always change after some time too. Who knows what the future will bring? You know, maybe months down the road, I'll go back to weekly or twice weekly or once a month. Who knows? Recovery has taught me that life is fluid. I'm a fluid being. I'm not a machine. I'm ever evolving. My needs are fluctuating, and it's okay to change my mind and change my pace is needed. So we'll see what the future has in store, but I will keep you updated on what to expect. So for now, in the short term, in the next few episodes, I'm going to be bringing on some guests to the show to offer you even more recovery insights to help you. As much as I love sharing my story and my journey, I know it'll help you even more to hear from other people and other experts and other people in recovery. So there's definitely going to be plenty of that in the future, including in the near future. And in the next episode or two, I am also going to premiere a new type of episode called Diet Culture at the Movies. So this is a really fun new type of episode where we're going to explore some popular movies from like the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, movies that helped shape and reinforce the diet culture landscape that we're all affected by, and then reviewing it from like a new recovered lens. Because helping to unpack this media and the effect that these messages had on us can help us to heal now as we move towards a better future, not just for our own recovery, but for the world at large, because the world is getting better with messages about bodies and weight and food in the media. But unfortunately, in very recent history, there's been a lot of hurtful messages. So we're going to dive into several movies, diet culture at the movies. Some that I have in mind to cover are Mean Girls, That's a big one. Bridget Jones's Diary, that's a classic. A lot of people talk about the toll that took on them and their body image in the 2000s. And we'll look at that from a recovered lens and process it. I literally have a whole list of movies. Oh, Shallow Hal. That's a big one if you haven't heard of it. We'll explore that. But I think I'm going to start off with Pitch Perfect. I think that's an interesting one to go with and kind of exploring how they talk about weight in that movie is really interesting. So we'll start with that, and yeah, that's coming soon, so stay tuned. And today I'm also going to premiere a new like mini segment for each episode that's all about recovery wins. So each week we are going to celebrate a recovery win from someone in the recovery community, because I know for me, when I was earlier in recovery, I really struggled with feeling like, oh my God, there's so much work to do. There's so much left to go. The finish line is so far away and I'm never going to get there. And it just felt so discouraging and like I hadn't come very far. So what really helped me with that was focusing more on how far I had come already rather than how far I had to go. Even if I only had come a little bit, every small step is huge and so worth celebrating. So from here on out on You Can Recover, we are going to take a moment each episode to celebrate a recovery win and make a big deal out of those little steps, because they are not so little, they're huge. They get you closer and closer to a better place with food and body. And it's just so encouraging to lean into those moments and really appreciate them for what they are. So we're going to take time for that. But first, today, let's focus on our topic about the one thing to avoid when making peace with food and body. And that thing is labeling foods as either good or bad or healthy and unhealthy. Why? Because language in recovery is powerful. Making one small change to the way that you describe food can help you make big progress in making peace with it. So, what I'm sharing with you today is advice that I've heard from many eating disorder professionals and from peers in recovery. And I've applied it to my own journey as well, and it has helped me immensely. And please do give yourself some grace if you're like, wait, I do call foods good or bad or healthy or unhealthy. That's okay. Please be kind to yourself. It's really common to talk about food this way, especially in our weight obsessed society. So no judgment if you do that. When we know better, we do better. So it is something that can be very helpful to avoid when you're recovering from an eating disorder. And that's because describing food in these two opposing extremes, it causes a rift in our relationship to our food and our ability to trust our bodies. Because when we give foods these labels of good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, we create a sense of obligation to eat certain foods and avoid others. But this black and white thinking leads to looking at some foods as something to fear and be afraid of and restrict, or that it might hurt you. And it puts other foods on a pedestal like it's some kind of forbidden fruit, which only makes you want it more and then leads to binging. And I'm wondering, are any foods coming to mind for you right now? Like, is there any food in particular that you try really hard to avoid or resist, or that you might be frightened of and then maybe end up binging on? For me, it was always anything deep fried or like anything fast food. I just felt like if it was from a fast food place and had been in a deep fryer, I felt like I was so awful and so horrible for eating it. I thought it was like damaging my body in real time. At the same time, I also thought these foods were pretty tasty. Like deep fried foods are savory, crunchy, they're yummy. So for me and a lot of people struggling with a binge restrict cycle, working so hard to avoid these foods that you think on one level are bad, but also on another level kind of like them, that only leads to that forbidden fruit phenomenon, which leads you to binging and then just leads you to beating yourself up and so much distress and shame. That's why I'm an advocate for rejecting these rigid labels and finding the nuance in food instead, because this is what helps to bring you closer to finding peace and freedom with eating and finding the truth about nutrition, because there's a lot of nuance in that too. It's not extreme black and white, good and bad. So let's explore this topic further and dive into why it is a good idea to avoid putting labels on food like good and bad and healthy and unhealthy. So let's start with the first dichotomy of food labeling, which is describing foods as good or bad. And to be very clear about what we're talking about, there are some foods that society and diet culture and wellness culture describe as good for you. And usually these foods are things like vegetables, fruits, lean protein, whole grains, to name a few. And then, of course, there are foods that are considered bad or bad for you. Things like candy, sweets, fried foods, anything that's classically considered junk food, which is another term I don't use. So this type of language and phrasing around food has been ingrained in us for years. It's really normalized to talk about food this way, but it can actually hinder your recovery progress and reinforce disordered thinking patterns. And another issue that comes into play when you call foods good and bad is that it's really easy to extend those labels beyond the food and onto yourself too. So if you eat a food that you consider to be bad, that can make you feel like you are bad or that you did something wrong by eating it. But you didn't. The truth is there is no moral value to food. Food is just food, no qualifiers. And you're not bad for eating certain foods. You're not good for eating certain foods either. And I don't mean that in a way to discredit any sense of pride or accomplishment that you might feel when you think you're eating good things. There's nothing wrong with feeling good or like you did something good. The problem is when the opposite side of the coin comes in and you beat yourself up and experience intense guilt or shame when you eat things that you think are bad. So the best thing to do is just to do away with these good and bad labels altogether. Food is not inherently good or bad. It's just food. And by labeling it, we oversimplify things and we miss out on understanding the full spectrum of what food can be in our lives. Food can nourish us. It can provide comfort and energy and connection with people in the world around us. It's so much more than just something good or bad. And when you start to regard food as something that is morally neutral, that helps you to make peace with it. So instead of using good and bad labels, focus on how food makes you feel. When you're eating something, you can ask yourself, does it satisfy you? Does it make you happy? Does it give you energy or comfort? And there's no right or wrong answer to these questions. Remember that your needs and your desires when it comes to the food you eat are constantly going to fluctuate. But when we stop labeling food as good or bad, we open the door to eating with more mindfulness and less guilt, which leads you to finding peace with food in the eating disorder recovery journey. Let's celebrate a recovery win on You Can Recover. Hey, welcome to the first installment of Recovery Wins. I thought it'd be so fun to highlight a recovery win, and sometimes it might be my own, sometimes it might be something from you or from other people in recovery. It's so helpful to really lean into those glimmers of hope and progress as they happen to help you stay motivated and hopeful on the path to recovery. So I will share the first recovery win from me. I'm nearly 8 years into recovery and I'm still celebrating wins. And my recent recovery win is going to a Taylor Swift dance party and dancing my booty off. I had so much fun. And years ago, I would never dance. I hated my body so much. I didn't want to move it. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to feel like there was attention being drawn to it because I felt like I was too ugly to dance, like I wasn't allowed to dance, even though I wanted to, but I was scared. The only way you would ever catch me dancing was if I was really heavily intoxicated. And I'm 4 years sober now. So the fact that I can go to a bar with a friend and not drink alcohol. I had some seltzer water and a mocktail, completely sober and dancing and just having the time of my life. And just I can't believe it. Years ago, I would be like, no way. There's no way I would ever do that. But here I am. And that is thanks to recovery and feeling better about my body and knowing that it's okay to take up space. It's okay to dance. There's no certain way you need to look or certain size you need to be to dance. So to be able to dance with other people and just scream and sing and move around was so much fun. So that's my recovery win. And also that would count as joyful movement as well, which is another journey I'm on. That was this week's recovery win with You Can Recover. If you're celebrating a recovery win of your own, let me know. I want to share it and shout it from the rooftops for you. Let's celebrate together. Nothing is too big or too small to share. Get in touch with me at You Can Recover Pod on Instagram. Slide into my DMs, let me know your recovery wins, or reach out to me by email at youcanrecoverpod@gmail.com. The second food labeling dichotomy that I want to explore is calling foods either healthy or unhealthy. And this can seem like it's different from calling foods good or bad, but ultimately, it's the same. It follows the same parallels. Think of foods that might be considered healthy. Again, those are the same things that are considered good, like fruits, veggies, grains, etc. And then foods that are considered unhealthy would be the same things that we talked about that are considered bad, like cookies, cake, fried foods, sweets. It's the same thing. Calling foods healthy or unhealthy is not so different from calling foods good or bad. And when you use labels like healthy or unhealthy, it implies that some foods help your health and some hurt it. And this is simply not true, especially that last part. To me personally, in my recovery, I've adopted a belief that there is no such thing as unhealthy food. All foods are healthy. All foods provide nourishment, energy, and nutrients. It all helps keep you alive and living. And with this topic, I like to use an analogy that I will share with you right now. So think of a food that you or society might consider to be very unhealthy. For me, the first thing that used to come to mind would be a Twinkie. Out of all the demonized food in this world, I think of a Twinkie when I use this analogy. So imagine that you are lost in a desert and you haven't had food or water in days. You're wandering around on the brink of death, and then suddenly you stumble upon a Twinkie. So, what do you think would happen in that scenario? Would you be like, oh, a Twinkie? No, thank you. That is so unhealthy. And just keep going. No way. You would scarf that thing down as fast as you could because the energy and nutrients in it would literally be saving your life in that moment, which sounds pretty darn healthy to me. So, this is an analogy that I came up with years ago when I was earlier in recovery, and it really helped put things into perspective for me and helped me to neutralize food and move away from the idea that eating any one food could be hurting my body or my health. And rejecting the idea of any one food being unhealthy is not ignoring objective nutrition or the fact that different foods have different nutritional profiles. No one's denying that. I think the key word there that I use is different. Different foods have different nutritional profiles. Not better, not worse, different. And our bodies thrive on a variety of different foods and nutrients. And when we regard them all as morally equal and healthy, that allows us the emotional peace and mental space to explore that variety and let it all in. We're much better off listening to our bodies and discovering what foods make us feel good and nourished and pleasant, both mentally and physically, compared to if we are demonizing foods and avoiding foods that we vilify and call unhealthy. This just sets us up for eating disorder behaviors, which hurts our health way more than any Twinkie or any other demonized food ever could. And of course, there are some foods that might actually cause health symptoms. Maybe some foods make you feel sick, or maybe you have an allergy or an intolerance or a health condition that can make you feel physically unwell when you eat certain foods, or that can cause symptoms of health conditions. Think of things like celiac disease or diabetes or several more health conditions. And this actually applies to me. I have a health condition where I choose to be mindful of how certain foods make me feel and affect the condition. And even still, I steer away from the term unhealthy when describing food. I really try to keep it as neutral as possible. And you can see that with the language that I've used here, too. Like I've said objectively that yes, some foods affect health conditions and cause symptoms. That's true. That's an objective fact. And notice that I didn't put any other qualifiers on it, like bad, harmful, or unhealthy. I just personally don't find that language helpful as someone in eating disorder recovery with a health condition that interplays with food and nutrition. Are there some foods that make my tummy upset or cause symptoms? Yeah, there are. Are there some foods that make me feel really energized and physically pleasant? Also, yes. And when I'm eating intuitively and rejecting these labels of healthy and unhealthy, I find that I'm naturally drawn to what feels good rather than what I am avoiding or having like a forbidden fruit effect with. That might not actually make me feel good. And when I'm eating intuitively and rejecting labels of healthy and unhealthy, that's what helps me find peace with food and better take care of my eating disorder recovery and my physical health conditions. But now we're getting into something deeper here. And I am planning to do an episode in the future that dives deeper into the topic of being in eating disorder recovery with physical health conditions that are intertwined with food, because I know that applies to a lot of people in recovery. So stay tuned for that in the future. And for now, remember that all food is morally neutral, all food is healthy. And to really bring this into perspective from a nutritional science standpoint, I'm going to reference a recent social media post from registered dietitian Anna Sweeney. She posted this the other day. It was about holiday food. And I just thought it was great, not just for the holidays, but for any time. And I will share it with you. And it goes, quote, "Bodies digest food factually, not judgmentally. Avocado toast is metabolized in the same way that cookies are. Carbs are carbs, protein is protein, green fat is fat. It's bothersome/dangerous/elitist/not science/maddening that the cultural elevation of certain foods provides them a sort of health halo, and the degradation of other foods puts them on an arbitrary naughty list. But naughty is the wrong word. All food provides our body with nutrition. Food is food. It's always better to be fed than not." End quote. Boom. Mic drop. Thanks, dietitian Anna. I will link to that post and her profile in the episode notes if you want to check that out further. So what does it look like to stop categorizing food as good or bad or healthy and unhealthy? Well, you can experiment with describing foods with some more neutral and objective terms. Next time you eat something, you could try saying, "This food is nourishing. This food is energizing. This food is comforting. This food makes my body feel blank. This food reminds me of blank. This food tastes good." Or "This food tastes interesting." Or "I don't know if this food's for me." There's a lot of small changes in the language you can use with food to make a big difference in finding peace with it. So as we wrap up, remember that no food is unhealthy. And one of the best things that you can do for your health is to recover from an eating disorder. The idea of any food being unhealthy is simply incorrect. Unless it's poisoned or spoiled, there's nothing unhealthy about it. And when we focus on calling foods healthy or unhealthy, we put the idea of being healthy itself on a pedestal, which enforces really toxic ideals around healthism and ableism. Health isn't a moral obligation. We all have different levels of health and they will fluctuate throughout our life. As long as you work to nourish yourself, listen to your body's needs, and enjoy foods that make you feel pleasant, both in body and mind, with no judgment and shame, you will get to a better place with food. So take care of yourself and reject these unhelpful food dichotomies and binaries. And remember, you can recover. Thanks for listening in to this episode of You Can Recover. Remember, recovery takes time, and you're one step closer after listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with someone else in your life who is working to make peace with food and body. Until next time, be kind to yourself, and remember, you can recover.